100 years ago, Nagasaki was Japan's gateway to the rest of the world, and the city's thriving foreign community was a conduit for all that was exotic and mysterious about this unknown country. If not for them, we may never have heard of Cho-Cho-san or Pinkerton, but was Madame Butterfly really a fictional character? Susan Graham looks at a beautiful city and its most famous inhabitant.
There really was a Madame Butterfly, and she lived in Nagasaki, and she married a foreigner, and she had a son named Trouble, and her real story is almost as tragic as the opera. Her real name was Kagamaki, but she was a geisha who worked in a local Nagasaki tea house around 1870. Her geisha name was Cho-san, or Butterfly. Her city, Nagasaki, is known for the atomic bomb in 1945, but both the bomb and Nagasaki figure in her story, and there is no other place in the world where this could have happened. Nagasaki at that time was Japan's main trading port, and there was a neighborhood of Europeans living there in more or less Western houses. What were all those foreigners doing in Nagasaki? Well, if you were a businessman and wanted to sell your widgets to Japan, Nagasaki was where the emperor said you had to go. Naturally, there was a great deal of interaction between visiting sailors, like Pinkerton, and the geishas. There were 3 Scottish brothers, the Glovers, Thomas, Alex, and Alfred, who were hugely successful, not only helping to start Mitsubishi, but also Kirin Beer, among other things. One of the Glover brothers, we're not sure which, sort of married the real Madame Butterfly in the way they did then, temporarily and for an exchange of 100 yen, or as they said, 20 Mexican dollars. According to the custom, the temporary marriage, a sort of rent-a-wife, could be ended by the so-called husband at any time. But here's the fascinating part. In some ways, the real story of Madame Butterfly paralleled the dramatic story created for the play and the opera from the original book by John Luther Long after the fact. In the stage versions of the story, Butterfly falls in love with the philandering sailor Pinkerton, and they have a son named Trouble. When Pinkerton returns with his wife, Butterfly commits suicide in the presence of her son. What actually happened is that after the real Butterfly gave birth to her son in 1870, she was abandoned by her sort of husband Glover, who went home to Scotland, and the son was adopted by his sort of uncle Tom Glover and given the name Tomosiburo, which was shortened to Tom, so he became another Tom Glover. He came to America to study at the University of Pennsylvania in about 1890, and then returned to Nagasaki. Meanwhile, the real Butterfly married a Japanese man, divorced, and then came back to settle in Nagasaki, where she died in 1906. Tom Glover fell in love with and married a woman who made him happy, and he followed in the family tradition by starting the country's first steamship trawler fishing industry in 1918. Then came World War II. Tom and his wife, Waka, were forced to sell the magnificent Glover house because it overlooked the Mitsubishi shipbuilding area. Because both Tom and his wife were children of mixed Japanese-Western marriages, the Japanese military authorities were suspicious. Tom and his wife had to move down the hill. The house was very nice, but it was no Glover mansion. Tom and Waka spent the war being followed and spied upon because they were of mixed ancestry. Waka died in 1943, and Tom was inconsolable. And just as his own Japanese government didn't trust his Scottish ancestry, he knew at the end of the war in 1945 that the new occupiers would regard anyone with Japanese blood as suspect for a long time to come, or worse, that they would ask him to take sides. The uncanny parallel with real life is that the son, who is promised in the opera that his name will be changed from Trouble to Joy, and who never saw his real mother again, couldn't avoid the trouble that seemed his fate. 17 days after the atomic bomb fell on Nagasaki in 1945, Tom Glover hanged himself. His suicide somehow brings the opera back to the real world. No, it's not the opera that Puccini wrote. But we come to the theater because sometimes, in ways big and small, life really does imitate art.